morning. Our theme for today is Embody Christ's Peace. When we embody something, we give visible or tangible evidence of it. God wants shalom for his creation, which involves justice, reconciliation, well-being, wholeness, and peace for all of creation. Jesus Christ embodies God's peace in all aspects of life. In the 4th chapter of Luke, Jesus has been out teaching and preaching to various places, and he has returned to his homeland of Nazareth, where, as he was accustomed to doing, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath and read from the scrolls. We find these words in verses 18 and 19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to the oppressed to let them go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now the torch has been passed to us. It is now our job today to make Christ's peace evident in the world. Peace is a journey into the purposes of God for humanity and all creation. If we are going to be peacemakers in our world today, we have to address the problems that are in our world today, such as racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, hate speech and other forms of hate against other people, and the competition for the essential resources of life. The world has economic injustice. We have inequality in the marketplace, and there are wars throughout the world. In other words, we have a lot of work ahead of us to proclaim Christ's peace in the world today. Our world does not reflect God's peace today. I would like to suggest to you that if we are going to proclaim Christ's peace and embody his peace in the world today, that we need to very closely align our lives with our enduring principles. The threats of war, or the threats of not showing peace in the world that I have just mentioned, are really violations of our enduring principles. The call to dialogue, to encounter, and to pursue mutual understandings are central to peacemaking in our world today. So today, I want to share with you and focus with you on 3 of our enduring principles. We have many more than that, but we're going to focus on 3 of our enduring principles today and how I think that they relate to Christ's peace being embodied in our world today. The first enduring principle that I want to focus on today is the principle of grace. There is a Buddhist teacher named Joan Halifax who describes a method of collaborative discernment with and on behalf of others. She describes grace, which is our first enduring principle that I want to focus on today. She describes grace by taking each of the letters of the word grace, G-R-A-C-E, and attaching a word to each of those letters to help us remember the different aspects of grace. And according to Joan Halifax, the G in grace is a reminder to us to pause and give ourselves time to get grounded. The world is such a busy place, and there's so many things that we can do that we get going so fast that we forget to stop and pause, to take time to really consider what is worth investing our time in and what is really important in life. So for Joan Halifax, the G in grace stands for grounded. Now she says that the R in grace refers to recalling attention. We recall our commitment to act with integrity and to respect the integrity of those with whom we come in contact. And she has another word besides recall, and she has the word remember for that R. She says, remember that our intention is to serve others and to open our hearts to the world. Now for Joan Halifax, the A in grace stands for attunement. She says, if we attune our lives to our own physical senses and our emotions and our thoughts, all of those go together to shape our attitudes and our behavior toward others. And then when we are attuned to ourselves, we can become attuned to other people, and then we can express our empathy to them through attunement. The C in grace, she says, has to do with considering how we will respond to others, and also considering how others may be responding to us, what they have to offer to us. And she says the E in grace refers to ethically engaging in action if appropriate. When Linda Booth was our apostle some years back, she used to tell us that we needed to tell more stories. So today I'm going to tell you 3 stories. We're going to emphasize 3 of our enduring principles, the first which we've talked about, grace, but there are 2 others that will follow. But with each enduring principle, I want to share a story with you about somebody whose life, to me, embodies God's peace in the world, or Christ's peace. So we're going to start with a story about grace. And the name of this story is Burned Biscuits. And it's a story told by a man in his adulthood about something that he remembers from his childhood. He said his mom came home from work one day after a long, hard day, and she was very tired. And of course, as soon as moms get home from work, they have to start thinking about what they're going to fix for dinner. So she went to the kitchen to start to prepare the evening meal. And she prepared a meal of eggs and sausages and some badly burned biscuits. When she put the food on the table and everybody came to the table to have the evening meal, of course, the first thing everybody noticed was the burned biscuits. The son looked at those and thought, ooh, do I have to eat those? And he looked at his dad to see how his dad was reacting, and his dad was showing no reaction whatsoever. He just reached over, took a burned biscuit off of the platter and put it on his plate. And then he turned to his son and said, how was school today? And that was that. The only thing the son noticed was that the dad did put a little extra butter and a little extra jelly on his biscuit that night, but he ate every bite of that biscuit and had no reaction whatsoever about it. After dinner was over and the son left the table, he did hear his mother apologizing to his dad about the burned biscuits. Later that night, when it was time for bed, the dad came to tuck the son into bed, and the son said to his dad, Dad, do you really like burned biscuits? And the dad wrapped his arms around him and he said, son, your mom had a long, hard day at work, and she's very, very tired tonight. And besides, a little burned biscuit never hurt anybody. As the son grew older, he began to realize what an important lesson that his dad had taught him that night. The world is full of imperfect things and imperfect people, but learning to accept each other's faults and to celebrate each other's differences is one of the most important keys in learning to have a healthy, growing, lasting relationship. Now, if we look back at the grace that was described to us by Joan Halifax, I think we can see all of those aspects that she mentioned in that story about burned biscuits. For instance, it is obvious that the family was well grounded in grace. It's obvious that the son was recalling or remembering that many, many years after the incident happened. The father was obviously attuned to his wife's feelings when she put burned biscuits on the plate, on the table, and he did not react to them. And he had to be considering what would be the appropriate response to the burned biscuits. And he chose ethically not to respond at all, which seemed to be the right thing to do at the time. May we learn to take the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of life and lay them aside. That little bit of wisdom that the son learned that night from his dad has lasted him for a lifetime. Grace is a way to embody Christ's peace. The next enduring principle that I'd like to focus on is that of generosity. Generosity is another way to embody Christ's peace. There was a man that lived in Alabama. He was a retired farmer. His name was Hody. And one day, Hody went into the local pharmacy, which was called Geraldine's Pharmacy. And he said to the pharmacist, "Do you ever have anybody come in to get a prescription filled, only to discover that they don't have the money to pay for it?" And she said, "Yes, that has happened from time to time." And with that, he handed her a $100 bill. And he said, "I want you to keep this. And the next time someone comes in and need a prescription and they don't have the money to pay for it, use this to make up the difference so that they can get their prescription filled." But that was just the beginning of the story. Every month since that time, Hody has gone to the pharmacist at the beginning of every month and given her another $100 bill and told her to do the same thing with it every month. And that went on for years and years. I want to just tell you one incident to illustrate how Hody's money got used. It was used many different ways. One day, a mother frantically came into the pharmacy, and she was just frantic as could be. And she said, "My son has been stung by a wasp and he's having a terrible reaction. And I need something to help him because he's having this awful reaction to the wasp sting." Well, the pharmacist knew exactly what she needed and she prepared it for her, handed it to her and told her the cost. And when she told her the cost, the mother got this stunned look on her face. And she suddenly realized that she didn't have the money to pay for it. But the pharmacist said, "Never mind, it's covered. Just don't ask any questions. Take it and go get your son under better circumstances so that he can heal." So that was only one of many times that Hody's money was used to meet the needs of others. Last year, Hody's health began to deteriorate. And he decided that probably his time left on this earth was not going to be very long. So he decided he needed to tell his daughter what he'd been doing because she had no idea. So he asked her to come over and he told her what he'd been doing for a good number of years. And he said, "I really would like for that to continue even after I'm not on this earth." And so he said, "I have money set aside, and all I'm asking you to do is to go to the pharmacy at the beginning of each month and take the money to her." He said, "You won't even have to say anything to her. She knows exactly what to do with it." So the girl said she would do that. So after he passed away, and he did pass away on January the 1st of this year, so it's very recent. After he passed away, she decided that she was going to try to figure out how much he had actually donated to the people in his community, because he'd done it for a good number of years. And when they did the calculations, it came out to more than $10,000. Word did get out after he passed away. Now, initially, he's told the pharmacist, don't tell anybody where the money came from. That's my stipulation. She agreed. But after he passed away, the word did get out about what Hody had done for people in his community for years. And people started sending donations to the daughter because they wanted Hody's legacy to live on in that town in Alabama. But that wasn't all. She had a telephone call from a man in the state of Washington. Now, think about that. This was in Alabama. Word travels fast once it gets out. And she had this call from a man in Washington state, and he said, I have heard about what your father did, and I want to fund his program for the next year because I want that to go on. That wasn't all. She got another telephone call from a man in Florida. And this man in Florida said, I heard about what your dad has been doing in Alabama, and I want to start, and I am starting a Hody fund in Florida so that I can do the same thing here that he did in Alabama. Imagine the peace that all of those people who benefited from Hody's donation experienced in their lives. And the peace isn't ending because Hody's legacy is living on, not only in the money that he left to make it continue, but also in the generosity of other people who have donated so that Hody's legacy lives on. So generosity is another way to embody Christ's peace. The third enduring principle that I want to focus on today is the enduring principle of the worth of all people. Now, the story that I want to share with you about the worth of all people is actually found in William Barclay's Bible study book about the book of Romans. So that's the source of this story that I want to share with you. And it's about a man named Thomas Edward Lawrence. Does that name mean anything to anybody here? Do you know that name? If you do, raise your hand. I'd like to know. Doesn't ring a bell in your head? Well, let me tell you, it didn't ring a bell in my head either. But let me tell you that I think you'll know who he is in just a minute. Thomas Edward Lawrence lived from 1888 to 1935. And he was a British archaeologist, an army officer, a diplomat, and a writer who became famous because of his role with the Arab Revolt from 1916 to 18 and the Sinai-Palestine campaign from 1915 to 1918 against the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. Any light bulbs go off yet? I think I saw one hand. I knew Jim would know that. Well, the light bulb didn't go off in my head. And so, interestingly enough, a couple of weeks ago, I was in my bathroom, cleaning the bathroom, and the radio on it. Of course, the radio is always on at our house. Bruce can't stand quiet. And so the radio was on, and all of a sudden, I can usually I can just kind of tune out the sound, because I like quiet. But for some reason, there was an interview going on the radio on Fresh Air on NPR, and she was interviewing a man who has written a new book. And something about that interview caught my attention, and so I tuned in to the interview. And as I listened to that interview, it sounded more and more familiar all the time. And it ended up being a 45-minute interview. And this man's life was fascinating, but it sounded so familiar. And I thought, gee, that sounds like the same man that's in the Barclay book. about the worth of a person. And so I went to my computer and I started looking in there, and sure enough, it was the same guy. But you will know him when you hear his name. He was called Lawrence of Arabia. Light bulbs? Yeah, I thought everybody would know. Oh, we know that. There was a movie made about him. And interestingly enough, he had such a fascinating life that I was just enthralled with reading about him. And of course, he's known as Lawrence of Arabia because he spent a lot of time in Arabia working for the British government. And according to this person who's written a new book, and by the way, the new book is called Lawrence in Arabia because it's written about all of the work he did in Arabia. But according to what this man in the interview said that I heard on the radio, he said that Lawrence of Arabia was a very short man. And so he was of stature about like the Arab people, and said when he worked in Arabia that he dressed in Arab clothes, and said he could come and go and they never knew he was a British citizen. So I found that very interesting. And there are lots of other interesting things that I learned about him that I didn't know until I heard that interview. And then that spurred me to go to the computer and start doing research. But he did. He had a life that was filled with the good and the bad and the ugly. I'm going to tell you about the good part today. So in 1915, he was journeying across the desert with a group of Arab people, and things were getting kind of desperate. The food was getting low and the water was getting low. And, you know, in the desert, they don't have grocery stores every few miles. So they were kind of getting in a bad situation. And as they were riding across, the conditions were awful. The wind was blowing like a flame. They had hoods over their heads to help them protect them from the weather. But the wind was just like a flame coming at them. And the sand, there was a sandstorm, and the sand was blowing in their faces. So it was not a good situation. And they were not having a very good time on their journey across the desert. But then all of a sudden, somebody said in the group, "Where's Jasmine?" And somebody else said, "Who's Jasmine?" And somebody else said, "Well, he's that yellow-faced guy who killed a Turkish tax collector, and he's fled to the desert trying to avoid getting caught." And then somebody else said, "Look, Jasmine's camel doesn't have anybody in the saddle, but his gun is still attached. Oh my goodness, he's not there." And then someone else said, "Well, maybe he got shot. Maybe we didn't know it, but maybe somebody shot him since he killed that tax collector." And then someone else said, "Well, he's not very strong in the mind. Perhaps he got lost in a mirage." And then somebody else said, "Well, he's not very strong in the body either. Maybe he fainted and fell off of his camel." And then somebody else said, "What does it matter? Jasmine is not worth 10 pence. And with that, the Arabs hunkered down on their camels and started to continue their journey. But Lawrence of Arabia did not. He turned around and started going back the way he came. And he rode for an hour and a half, risking his life. He had very little water, very little food, not knowing how far he was going, but he went back to see if he could find Jasmine. And after he had ridden for an hour and a half, he thought he saw something in the sand, but he wasn't sure what it was. But when he got close, it was Jasmine. He was practically blind from the sand in his eyes. And it was like the desert was trying to murder him with the heat and the thirst because he didn't have anything to eat. He didn't have any water. So Lawrence went up and pulled him up on his camel and gave him some of the last drops of water that they had left. And then they started journeying back toward the group that they had left. As they came back up to the Arabs, they said, "There's Jasmine. Lawrence found Jasmine, who's not worth 10 pence. Obviously, they didn't think there was any worth to Jasmine's life, but Lawrence of Arabia thought that his life was worthwhile. In God's eyes, all people have worth. So recognizing the worth of everybody, of all of God's creation, is another way to embody Christ's peace. In Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 to 17, we find a wonderful summary of many different ways that we can embody Christ's peace in our lives. Listen to these words. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. And be thankful to the Lord and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom. And with gratitude in your hearts, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God. And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And in closing, I want to share with you a very familiar scripture from John, chapter 4:27, which says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you." Notice in those few words, we heard about two different kinds of peace. There's the peace that the world offers, but there's a better peace, the peace that only Jesus offers. May we find ourselves following the path of peace that Jesus offers. Embody Christ's peace in everything that you do in your life. We're now going to sing hymn number 387, Bring Forth the Kingdom. You may remain seated.